So in this lecture, I want to talk about conformational analysis and how we visualize acyclic compounds, those that are singly bound with Newman projections. So conformational analysis, generally speaking, is the task of examining various spatial arrangements of atoms within a molecule. So it's a very three-dimensional picture. And we're going to discuss concepts such as their relative strain or energy. And we'll discuss specific types of strain as we proceed. But conformational isomers are those that can be related through bond rotations. Bond rotation, specifically about a sigma bond, will relate these acyclic conformational isomers.